I thought I'd start taking a closer look at some of the specific aspects. And I think the best place to start is with nubs. So here is just a series of photos. A lot of them are very old from the Osireion project, and they show all the various nubs around the Osireion. And it's quite interesting when we look at just one specific aspect. We just look at all the versions of it, and I'll come back and I'll look at things like the tiny blocks and the polygonal stonework. And if you're interested in knowing my theories on how this amazing stonework was done, if you can go into my channel and see if you can find an episode called Stone Softening and the Art of Polygonal Masonry. The polygonal masonry that went into the building of the Osireion. So this video is just as many video clips or photos that I could find, and ones I took myself when I was there, just showing the amazing structure that is the Osireion of Abydos. So here you will see all the types of polygonal masonry that I could find, and I will just let you watch it. It speaks for itself. The immensely ancient Osireion has giant megaliths as well as tiny little blocks inserted into the polygonal masonry. It is an exceptional example of extremes in size. Any footage you get to see of the Osireion, you will see the megaliths. You will see these massive stone blocks with other massive stone blocks perched on top of them. And that's how people imagine the Osireion. People don't often look at the tiny things. So I'm going to focus on the tiny little blocks and show you all the weird little tiny weeny blocks that are situated in the polygonal masonry. But you can see how many there are, and they were everywhere throughout the Osireion. So people say that, these blocks are because something wrong with one of the bigger blocks, and so they carved out a little space and popped in a little block. I don't see that. I don't think that's correct. I think it's got to do with something else. I'm pretty sure I know what those little blocks are for. I just want to show you all the places in the Osireion that I could find that have big blocks that actually curve around corners. This amazing block is in the corner of the Osireion where the little tiny bit of the ceiling still remains. And it's an ugly block, but it's just mind-blowing the way that it curves around. And there's quite a few of them like that. Most of them, however, that are curved just have a little bit of curve, but that big one had a big one. This one here, it too has a fairly big amount of curve in it, but mostly it's just little curves. And also blocks that have indents, as if the stone was drying and they leaned something against it, or they tried to push it back into place just to get it a bit better shape. Did you know that there are blocks in the Osireion that look as if they have been melted? Now, I don't believe they have been melted, but how they came to look like this is almost as interesting as if they had been melted. Let's start by looking at whereabouts these blocks are. The wall that is closest to the Temple of Seti, which has the last of the remaining ceiling blocks on it, and underneath that there is an area that looks very weirdly like it's been melted, and below that another weird area which you can see in the photos. So let's start with this weird bent stone that we discussed in a previous episode. It has a certain look about it, like it's not supposed to look like that. It looks as though it got a bit damaged when the concrete was wet. But of course it's not concrete. Or is it? But even stranger than that are the blocks above it, where right at the top near the ceiling, they've clearly been dressed. So that means that they have been polished down in preparation for getting hieroglyphs painted onto them and then later carved into them. So this is as far as the dressing of the stone has got. But have a close look at where it stops. What are the tools that would make marks like this, leaving it looking like the stone has essentially been melted away to form a smooth surface? Can you imagine a copper chisel doing this? And look at this corner area here. It seriously looks as if some liquid has been thrown onto it and has melted it away or softened it so that it can be scraped off. You may well ask, is this the handiwork of the dynastic Egyptians? And I would say yes, it is. I think that even though I think that the site is much older than Seti the First, I think that this is the handiwork of the people of Seti. But how did they do it? So that is really the big question for this particular aspect, because there must have been some kind of residual technology available to them to enable them to do this. So, what do you think? Please tell me in the comments. We're going to have a look at mortise and tenon joints. There may also be a few dovetail clamps in there as well, because I'm not sure I can actually tell the difference. But anyway, these are the photos, so I hope you enjoy them. This one's kind of interesting because it's a multi-layer joint. You can see a small box, then a bigger box, and then an outer area. I'm showing you this from a couple of different angles, just so that you can get the full perspective of it. This one was located just over one of the areas where the symbol of life, the tree of life, was located, because there's two sides to that, and it was the one with multiple little trees of life, which were actually quite hard to see, but they were there, and this was just above them. And another one that's double layered. And these ones look more like dovetail joints, but they may well be broken off mortise and tenon joins as well, so I'm not completely sure. The ones that are square like that, I'm assuming, are mortise and tenon, and the ones that have a little bit of flair to them are more likely to be the butterfly joins. And we're going to have a look at drill holes, and yes, there are plenty of them. Most of them are part of the door, let's call it frames for lack of a better word, around each of the niches. So there's one in the top of each corner. And the most intriguing drill hole is in one of the sunken areas. Now, I didn't manage to get any photos of that myself, but these are some pictures from James Westerman, and his website is fantastic, so I recommend you check his website out. So we're going to have a look at quarrying marks. So everywhere I went in Egypt, I noticed that the ancient sites looked like they had been, well, quarried at, so that someone had come along and tried to reuse a lot of the blocks there. And the Osireion was no exception. There are lots and lots of places where there are these little quarrying marks where someone has created the hole in order to stick a plug in order to break the stone apart. And some of those quarrying marks, the stone is actually broken apart, and some it's just the actual marks in anticipation of breaking it apart. We're going to have a look at pillow blocks. So the description is that it looks like a pillow because it's puffy, it puffs out and comes back to the joint. And one of the best places you can see a good example of this is the lower casing stones of the Menkaure pyramid. And the ones at the Osireion, although they are pillow blocks, they're not quite as puffy out as they are at the pyramid of Menkaure. Now, these are the style of puffy block you can see in places like Machu Picchu and Cusco, and in fact in many places in South America, and I understand around the world as well. But let's just have a look at the ones here in the Osireion now. The blocks on the outer walls that have not yet been dressed, i.e. smoothed down to a flat surface, all look like this. So they have that puffy look. There are some nubs on them as well, but it's that puffy look where the join comes together, but it goes in to come together. And that's the pillow block style. And it's all round the walls of the Osireion, but it's a little bit more subtle than in places like Menkaure pyramid, but it's still very clearly there. This is a very common aspect to the polygonal masonry. Have you heard of ancient Trilithons? You've probably seen them if you've seen a picture of Stonehenge. Wikipedia defines a trilithon as trilithon or trilith is a structure consisting of two large vertical stones or posts supporting a third stone set horizontally across the top as a lintel, and it is commonly used in the context of megalithic monuments. The Osireion, of course, fits the bill perfectly. In fact, it is described as a series of trilithons. You may well ask, why then is the trilithon at Baalbek called a trilithon? That I have no answer for. Maybe they thought that it once was a trilithon and then it was put into a wall, but it is definitely three large blocks. So maybe that's the reason. The first trilithon I ever saw was in Tonga, and it blew my mind. It was so gigantic, and not in the sort of location that one would expect to see a trilithon. But I deviate as usual, and let's get back onto the subject of the Osireion. There are no other structures, even Stonehenge does not compare to the size and bulk of the trilithons of the Osireion. The part of the Osireion which is considered a series of trilithons is made up of rose granite. Each of the blocks of rose granite is massive, and they are perfectly smooth, and they are mortarless. And this is what it used to look like thousands of years ago. Another very interesting thing about the Osireion is the dressed and undressed stone. Now let me explain. Dressed stone at the Osireion has a smooth finish, whereas undressed stone, on the other hand, has been left in a more, let's say, natural state. So let's look at a few examples. We've got dressed, undressed, dressed, undressed, dressed, with undressed next to it, and another one with dressed in two places, the ceiling and part of the wall, with undressed in the other part, and dressed and undressed here, as well as dressed and undressed here. So, what's the big deal about if it's dressed or not at the Osireion? Well, it's interesting because the place is obviously partially dressed, and this is one of the reasons given by archaeologists for it being an unfinished site. The central island of the Osireion has been completely dressed, and one wall on the outer wall has also been dressed, and also inscriptions carved upon it in places. There is also an area where it looks like they started the process of smoothing out the stone and just gave up. If you're someone who thinks the Osireion was built by Seti I as part of his complex, then this way of thinking makes perfect sense. But if you're like me and think the Osireion is a much older site that Seti found and built his temple around it, while also trying to make use of the site for the mysterious celebration of Osiris, then the undressed stones may have been intentionally left that way, and only the central island was ever intended to be dressed. And then Seti came along and started to make improvements on the site, tried to fix a few things because the place was pretty old already, and sort of pretty it up to his liking. So what do you think? We're going to look at the sunk ceilings. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, a sunk ceiling, but I couldn't think of any other way of describing this. It's like a little sunk area, but it's up instead of down. But I'm jumping the gun here. So let's start with where it is. So in the Osireion at Abydos, there are these little, I call them niches. They're tiny little rooms all around the outside wall of the Osireion. It's hard to actually describe this. It's like a sunk shower cubicle, the floor of a shower cubicle, because it's sunk into the ground so that the water stays within. But this is on the ceiling instead of on the floor. I wanted to talk about something that surprised me. It may be perfectly normal for people who are involved in stonemasonry, but to me this kind of, it shocked me. It is the ceiling of what they call the sarcophagus room. Now, it's got a vaulted ceiling, but if you're like me and you don't know anything about stonemasonry, there is an expectation that this is a result of the blocks, the large slabs, leaning towards each other. Like in this drawing by Tom Hines. It's the way most people would expect those blocks to sit, but that is not the case. These are two flat blocks that have had the underside of the blocks cut upwards, make it look as if it's a vaulted ceiling. I don't know if that photo is very good. I'll find another one. So yes, this one's much better. So you can see that the blocks are an interesting shape. So this is how the archaeologists describe it. It's a kind of pitched roof covering 4.75 metre wide sarcophagus chamber consisting of two beams together against the centre and cut out into the shape of a triangle. The blocks were 1.18 metres high and had a notch at the lower edge to minimise them slipping down. Although this is a really useful diagram, it's not the right pitch. It's more like 30 degrees rather than 20 degrees that the actual ceiling is set at. And of course, it's been done perfectly to that degree. And this isn't the only place within the Osireion where this technique is used. There are blocks from the entranceway that also have that technique used on them. So here you see the scoop marks coming down the wall, and on here you see it on the roof blocks. It actually looks like it's just been grouped along the edge there. Then if we look along the top of the blocks here, you can also see the scoop marks, and here. But these scoop marks differ quite a lot from the scoop marks that you see at the quarry, and I believe it's a completely different technique. When they got the water down to a certain level, they found that there were these thrust beams at one end. That's labelled in green on this diagram. So these beams are made of the same stuff as the walls, which are sandstone rather than being of granite. So that is a little bit strange because you'd expect them to want it to be extremely strong. But anyway, the reason these thrust beams weren't noticed before they took the water out was because they are quite far down. They're as far down as the fourth course of the underwater part of the Osireion. So far, they've only been found at one end, but the depths of the Osireion have yet to be explored, and it is theorized that there may be more of these thrust beams at deeper levels covering all four sides of the Osireion. And some people actually do think that they were not for stability at all, but rather they are hollow and act as pipes, which is an interesting theory, and this is just another one of those fascinating little aspects of an enormously fascinating ancient building. The Osireion is located behind the Seti First Temple, but beyond the Osireion, into the desert, is a set of foundation blocks for great pylons, so that there would be an entrance from the desert through these great gates. Now, these gates are even bigger than the ones put in place in front of the Seti Temple. I have been unable to establish if these foundations are megalithic, but from the photo, I would assume so. A question was raised by Keith Hamilton in his paper regarding these gates. Were these the original gates to the Osireion? And if they were, why did the dynastic Egyptians build a tunnel coming round from the side to go into the Osireion? They could have made it a direct route. Another alternative is that this leads to a different entrance to the Osireion, possibly one that goes deep underground, but there is no evidence of that. Third possibility, the one that I support, is the idea that this was the original set of gates to the Osireion long before the Seti Temple was actually built. Strange insets around some of the massive blocks which form the pillars, as well as one of the cutout areas in the centre of the Osireion. It was Ben of Uncharted X that actually brought this to my attention. So while I was doing my research on the Osireion, I was checking out all the various other independent researchers. And so let's just have a look at a clip.
But there's it's inset slightly, like it's like this inset that runs around the edge of this. I'll even zoom out a bit more. Runs around the edge of this whole pillar base, and you'll find the same thing on these other pillars. So if we look at the base of this pillar, you see it's inset, right? It's inset in, so I think this was likely a pillar base.
I never even noticed this feature when I was at the Osireion, and it wasn't until I went back and had a look at all my photos that I realised that, yeah, it was definitely a thing. So let's have a closer look at some of these photos where the insets are, well, as obvious as possible, because it is quite difficult to see them. So as you can see, the insets are around the pillars there, you see that? And they're around the sunken square part in the centre, but not the oblong square part. So there are two sunken areas, but only one of them has the inset, whereas all of the pillars have the inset around the base. So with the 10 pillars and the single square central sunken area, that makes 11 areas which have got this strange inset. Plus there's also these weird little drainage passages as well. So yeah, there's a few little oddities at the base of the pillars. And there's also what looks like a drainage hole in the square sunken area in the centre, which is also very intriguing. But where the insets don't exist is the oblong sunken area. And this, to me, is a very big clue, because we've got the insets around all the pillars and we've got the inset around the square sunken area, but not the oblong sunken area. Well, from my perspective, it means that in the square sunken area, there was something there which would be the equivalent of a pillar. I don't think it was a pillar, but it would be a large stone item which required drainage from that hole. But there was something completely different in the oblong sunken area. There is something very unusual about the doorways of the Osireion. So the doorways are to small rooms. So here's the map of where the small rooms are. So let's just have a quick look at this clip from Richard Smith's channel, which is like a 3D walkthrough, so we can see where these little rooms are. So at this point we're going through the main giant pillars, and the outer walls have the little rooms, so you can see them all there. There are a lot of them, 17 to be precise. So you've got the central island with all the big heavy pillars, and then beyond the water, which surrounds the island, you've got the 17 small rooms sunk into the outer walls. So what's so unusual about the doorways to these little rooms? Well, they start off at the top being square, and then as you progress down the entranceway, they become wider and they are curved. So right at the very top, you've got two holes. So obviously door holes at the top, but no door holes at the bottom. So these doorways clearly do not operate the same way that Egyptian doors traditionally work. And they are more in line with another way of looking at sealing a doorway. And so let's have a look at how that would work. Let's assume we've got some blocks that match the size of the entrance to these rooms, and they have knobs on the end, and those knobs can slot into the holes at the top of the doorway. So they would be lifted and the slots would go into place, and the shape of the block that would fit in there would be curved, so it would slide into the areas down each side. And by pushing on the base of the block, it would fit into place and you would have a fully sealed room.